Today we're going to talk about research. Hi class, today we're going to talk about research. This is one of those topics that a lot of people don't find very interesting because the words come in and theories and research and hypothesis and all that comes up and people don't tend to, they check out. So I'd like to start with an example of, the book starts with an example of e-cigarettes. I don't like that one. Let's start with something that is really interesting. Does driving a self-driving car actually improve outcomes for drivers? Okay, so less tickets, less accidents, etc. Getting there on time. So we could set up a study to ask the question, are people better drivers than these self-driving cars? And we're gonna have to do a couple of things. We're gonna have to not just let anybody who owns a self-driving car drive those self-driving cars, because there might be a difference in people's driving capabilities of the people who drive self-driving cars or the people that don't drive self-driving cars. There's clearly going to be an economic difference, right? It's much more expensive to drive a self-driving car than it would be to drive a manual transmission vehicle. So my theory goes like this, right? I have observations and I have a question to answer. Does self-driving vehicles, let's say Tesla's self-driving cars, do they do a better job of driving than people in general? And that question we're going to put to the test by randomly assigning people to either driving a self-driving Tesla or driving their regular car. If we want to answer this question, we're going to buy a bunch of Teslas and then we're going to randomly assign people to either the group that drives self-driving Teslas or the group that drives their own car. And we're going to follow them over time. I'm going to predict people are better drivers than self-driving cars. And so that's my prediction. I have a hypothesis in my head. My hypothesis is people are actually better drivers than computers. And so we conduct this research by randomly assigning people either to the self-driving Teslas or to their own car. And we track them over time with those metrics of, did they get to the place that they were going on time? Did they get more or less accidents? And did they get more or less traffic violations, tickets, etc. And in research, we use statistics. That's the branch of mathematics that focuses on the organization, analysis, and interpretation of a group of numbers. So we're going to track those numbers and ask the question, are these two groups, the group that drives their own cars and the groups that drive self-driving Teslas, are they substantively different? Sometimes people get in accidents, sometimes people get tickets, sometimes they get to where they're going on time. And so we have to do a large group. We can't just buy one Tesla and have a random person drive their car, because that's not enough people to generalize. If we get 100 Teslas and we then select randomly 100 people to drive them and randomly select another 100 people to drive their own cars, and we track those two groups, we should be able to suss out whether there is a difference between driving your own car or having the self-driving car drive you in terms of these outcome measures that we've looked at. One of them is called the dependent variable. A dependent variable is a variable that we measure across all the groups, right? Whether you're in a self-driving car or you're driving your own car, we measure number of accidents, number of traffic violations, and did you get to your destination on time. Those are our dependent variables. Now the independent variable, this is the one that's different from each other, is that some people drive their own car and some people drive the self-driving car. If our research supports my theory that people are better drivers, then we'll see a discrepancy, that there will be more people getting into accidents or more traffic violations or more people being late to their destinations in the self-driving category than there would be in the people driving their own cars. There's a theory, that's an explanation based on observations, a hypothesis. But a hypothesis is basically your prediction of what you expect to happen. And then finally, we convey that to other people. One of the most important parts of research is the interpretation. What does that mean to people? Does it mean that they should save up their money and go buy a Tesla? Or does it mean there's no real difference here and you're better off just driving yourself? You need to, at the end of your research, come to a statement like that. Something simple, something that gives people instructions of what to do based on the research. Another example of research might be something like drug research. A lot of times people who are studying psychology are interested in whether there are drugs that can help people with mental illness. research in general has three primary goals, and that's description, prediction, and explanation. So description, right? We want to be able to describe a phenomenon. Something like, say, depression. If I said, depression is a phenomenon that's consistent with people experiencing feelings of hopelessness, overwhelmed by the world, less pleasure in things that they normally find pleasure in, or sadness, thoughts of self-harm or suicide. Those are descriptions of research topic depression. I also need to predict and say, well, I think that these depressive symptoms are a result of the classic one, serotonin. But let's say we have a new serotonin molecule. We got this chemical, and I am making now a prediction, right? We've got the description, and now I've got a prediction. This chemical molecule is going to make people's symptoms of depression, all that sadness, suicidality, lack of motivation, problems eating, sleeping, etc. It's going to aid them. It's going to benefit them in some way. When we've done this research, half the people get drug B, and half the people get drug A. 33% of the people who got drug B had remission of their depressive symptoms, clinically significant improvements in their depression. In that case, would you recommend giving drug B to patients who have depression? I think most people would. If you're a savvy person, you might say, well, what are the consequences? What are the costs? What are the consequences? Well, let's go over to drug A. Drug A has a 50% improvement in depressive symptoms. That is, half the people who took drug A had clinically significant relief from their depressive symptoms. And in the explanation for this, drug B is a placebo, right? So there aren't real consequences to taking a placebo. Drug A, however, is the classic serotonin selective reuptake inhibitor. Those are the drugs that people usually take for depression. And if 50% of the people get better, that sounds great, right? Except it comes with a bunch of consequences. Drug companies call them side effects. We don't call them side effects. There's no such thing as a side effect. There are effects and not effects. And the effects of the drug, taking the drug A, like say a Zoloft or a Prozac, the consequence of that are headaches, nausea. They feel a lack of desire for sex. We call that a reduction in your libido. And you're causing something to that group of people that actually are symptoms of depression. If you think about it, not wanting to do things that you find pleasure in is a classic example of depression. And if the drug makes you not want to have sex, it thereby makes you more likely to experience symptoms of depression. So when we do the explanation of this research, we'll say, yeah, drug B had less people get remittance from their depression, but drug A, while it had more people get remittance, also caused all those people to experience these effects. And these effects are deleterious to them. So research can help us to understand the subtleties and the nuances that help us to know what to do, what decisions to make, what drugs to take, what drugs not to take.
You take drugs, Danny?
Every day.
Good. So what's the problem?
I don't know.
The book uses steps for conducting research, and it shows a framework that describes how to do it, right? Choose a specific research question, search databases, get some research information, form your hypothesis based on that reading you've done, test your hypothesis given the appropriate research methodology, recruit participants to come in and then take these tests that you're going to give them, and then use statistical analyses to evaluate whether the results you're finding are abnormal, are they different, and are they caused by the particular independent variable that you've suggested. Finally, the last step, they say, is report the statistic. Again, that's that part where I described explanation. If I go and conduct research and do a bunch of statistics on something and I never tell anybody, is it really worth my time? So that last step of explanation is very important. I would call it the most important, is how do we explain things to people? Let's talk about the replication crisis. About 15 years ago, right around when I started teaching at CRC, psychologists figured something out. And it wasn't good news. And this news meant that what they'd been telling people for a long time wasn't substantiated. That the research they conducted and in their explanations, i.e. telling people what to do, it wasn't supported by the data. Now, here's what happened. People would conduct research. But what they were doing is they were conducting studies and finding, nope, their hypothesis wasn't supported. So they'd run another study, doing the same kind of thing. Maybe a little tweak. The same kind of thing. And nope, their hypothesis wasn't supported by the data. And then they run another one, and another one, and another one. And in doing so, what ended up happening is they ran so many studies, then they only reported the one where their findings were supported by the data. And what that means is that basically they were taking chances. It's almost like gambling, is that sometimes you're going to roll a 6 out of 2 dice, but it's pretty rare. So if you roll dice and you record yourself, let's say I'm doing some sort of a TikTok video here, and I take 2 dice and I roll them. What's the chance that it's going to be 6 as the result? Very unlikely, right? It's 1 out of 36. So it's a very statistically improbable thing to happen. But if I turn off the video and then I roll them again on the next one, and then I roll them again on the next one, and I roll them again on the next one, and then I only show you the video of me rolling 6 on those dice, you shouldn't really believe me. But people did, because these results were published in journals. Journals publish the results of people who were doing what's called p-hacking, or probability hacking, where they'll do a bunch of research and they'll only report the one that fits their narrative. Unfortunately, when we found this out, psychology had to kind of have a come to Jesus moment and be like, well, what are we going to do as a research community? We've got to change our life. We've got to change the way we do stuff. We have to make sure that the studies we publish are replicable. Now, what does replicable means? It means you can repeat it. So if I found that self-driving cars were better than not self-driving cars, and I go and I publish that data, and I explain to everybody, go buy self-driving cars, they're going to make you on time, they're going to make you not get tickets, make you not get in accidents. Somebody should check me.
So come on and diggity check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Did you know that I have a financial interest in Tesla or something? And that's what people in research had. They had interest in publishing studies that would give them academic credit, right? So that they could get tenure and they would have jobs where they could do the research they wanted and have the careers they wanted. There was financial incentive to do so, to do this p-hacking. The discipline of psychology did a thorough job of looking at this and said, we have to go back and substantiate these claims about our research. And so they put their money where their mouth is. That is, that they invested time and effort in going back and replicating studies that were substantial for our discipline. If I had found that the Tesla self-driving cars were better than the people who drive their own cars, somebody else should go out and do that with some other cars, right? They should take a separate set of people and replicate the research findings that I have. Because if it is true that self-driving cars are better than cars driven by yourself, then we should find the same thing in a separate group of people doing self-driving cars versus a group of people doing driving their own car. Let's talk a bit about the history of research in psychology. I've already told you about an unethical man named John Watson. J.B. Watson was abusive to that little boy Albert, if you remember that from our previous video. We can't do that research again. I also told you about the Stanford prison study. That's another one we can't replicate. When we find that people have done unethical things in research, we choose to not repeat those studies. Also, when you propose research, if you're at a university and you want to do research, you have to get approval from something called an Institutional Review Board, or an IRB. And that's a group of people, experts in research, who will take on your planned study, and they'll evaluate it and say, is this something that's going to cause harm to people? We started doing a study, the US government did a study on people in Tuskegee, and they were studying syphilis, and they were tracking people who had syphilis to understand the parameters of the disease, the trajectory of the disease, the prognosis, how the disease is going to unfold. It became a really unethical disease when we developed an antibiotic that cures syphilis. They didn't tell the people in Tuskegee who had syphilis that they had syphilis, so they withheld information from them. Problems with their spouses, their partners getting syphilis, and then not knowing that they could go get treatment because they've been told it wasn't syphilis. Moreover, it caused them, because they didn't get treatment, it caused them to actually have secondary syphilis and tertiary syphilis, which goes to your brain. And encephalitis that's caused by that causes permanent brain damage. These people were harmed by the US government. The government really wanted to know about the disease, but they allowed their desire for the outcome of the research to get in front of the beneficence. That's, does it benefit people who are participating? Let's talk about animals. All right, here we go. we got the puppy research here. So if you want to know about animals in research, we're going to talk a lot about animals in research. And animals are our best friends, right? Right, puppy? She's up here in the air. I gotta put her down. Okay, puppy. All right, there she is. Hello. We use animals in research. Again, not our dogs, not our pets, but we do use them in research. So let's talk about the ethics of using animals in research. Whether it be B.F. Skinner's rats and pigeons, whether it be Jane Goodall's chimpanzees, people are interested in studying animals. Now, why are they interested in studying animals? Often because it relates to how we can learn about ourselves. And in psychology, we use animal models in research to learn generally about ourselves. It makes sense that because we're all on the same sort of mammal platform, that if I test things on learning for a dog, or I test things on learning for, say, a rat, that we could get the same results in humans, but we can't do some research with humans that we could do with animals. I had several students who studied rats, and they were learning how to use a particular enzyme to stop learning that had occurred, something called LTP, or cellular learning. We'll talk about it when we get to the learning place. But they would teach a rat to do something and record, with using an electrode in its brain, record the actual learning in the cell. That a cell started to fire more often after this experience. We call that learning. And then they used an enzyme to go in and reverse that, to take away that speed of firing that had increased, called long-term potentiation. They reversed it. These rats had had a bunch of chemicals put in their brain and had had brain surgery to put in electrodes. And at the end of the day, the researchers killed the rats. Now, whether you find that to be repugnant or abhorrent, that's what they do. I don't really like it, but I do like the research that we found out about the brain based on this research that was done with these rats. So I'm appreciative of them.